Welcome to episode 16 of Kontrarian Korner. My name is Ben Kellerin. Today we have Matt Erickson of the King Pilled podcast on. He's a very interesting political commentator and was the first guy to introduce me to the idea of the PayPal Mafia and some of the stuff surrounding this year's election cycle. So I've been listening to his stuff for a while, and he has some interesting thoughts on Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and all those guys that have started to be much more influential in U.S. politics and current events. So, Matt, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, man. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So, we were chatting a little bit before the show, and I think it's interesting to see how quickly the whole PayPal Mafia idea has kind of taken over some of the discourse on Twitter as far as influence over the election and Elon's influence over Twitter. I know that Elon's conversation with Donald Trump last week was pretty interesting to listen to, but I'd be curious to hear you kind of give a short breakdown of what you started to see with the PayPal Mafia and maybe start to pull on some threads as far as the different people that you think are kind of the most influential there.
Yeah, so this was back in January. I started digging into them at the behest of Jason from the 2-Bit podcast. He on King Pilled, Cooper, my co-host, and I were talking about the different generations, the way the different generations relate to one another. So you have the boomers, then you have Gen X, and you have millennials and Zoomers, and I'm a millennial, Cooper's a Zoomer, and we were noticing kind of a parallel between the boomers and the millennials, that the millennials are kind of like, I think a friend of ours has called them the echo boomers. They're sort of if you think of the boomers and their boomer truth regime, as Academic Agent puts it, they have the naive boomer idealism is the term I've given this view of the world that the boomers had, that everything was always, we were kind of at the end of history, infinite growth, everything's always going to be up and to the right, and we've perfected the art of human governance, and then they have all their different adjacent things that they tie into their worldview. It's one of the most delusional generational perspectives of all time. But as a matter of economic happenstance and existing in the immediate post-World War II era, they benefited from a massive growth in at least perceived prosperity and wealth that they've been able to accumulate.
Yeah, the number must go up.
Right. And it's kind of like they lived in a world where the number is always going up. So this must be something fundamental about how the world has changed, that the number will always go up. And they're also overseeing the time in history where you have these global communication networks and global supply chains, and the real birth of globalism happened within their generation. So they're very much bought into all these ideas. However, the following generation, Gen X, is just as a matter of generational personality, they're much more cynical, individualist, kind of given maybe more rebellious, or they're willing to go off the beaten path a lot more than the boomers, who are much more conformist. And then the millennials are sort of like if you imagine like a TikTok effect happening here, you have the tick with the boomers, and then the talk with the Gen X, and then the tick with the millennials. The millennials are much more like they're like the generation that is conceived in the image of the highest aspirations of the boomers. So the millennials are much more conformist, and they're much more beholden as a generation to the boomer truth regime. The Zoomers, after them, however, were basically came of age with the world totally going to shit. And they have no real personal investment in it, generally speaking. They're much more absurdist, much more nihilistic. They've kind of lost meaning. They're very deeply embedded in irony, and it's not cool to take anything seriously. So it winds up that Gen X and the Zoomers have a kind of a parallel to them in the same way as like the Boomers and the Millennials. There's sort of a special relationship with them. So a characteristic of the Boomers that I had observed is there's this type of organization called egos that Eric Weinstein talks about, which ego stands for embedded growth obligation. So it's an organization that's really beholden to this boomer view of the world, where it's going to be you're going to create an organization that is like baked into the identity of the organization is that it's always going to be growing and expanding. And it's like part of the nature of the organization. So people enter the organization with the assumption they're going to get to the top and that there's going to be a space for them there. You could think of like a law firm might be a really good example of this, where you have the associates who their goal is to become partner one day. Well, you can only have so many partners, and then you have to create a new law firm. Well, then you create a new law firm and you got more partners, and you create another one, and you do this over and over, and eventually you've got more lawyers than you know what to do with. And the ones who have made it to the top they have kind of like a first mover advantage at the top, where they're able to control the industry itself. They're able to insulate themselves at the top. And as they've been overseeing, they had this rapid expansion of wealth, but now it's increasingly evident that the society's been completely hollowed out from the inside. So they don't have like a retirement plan. There is no, for like a professor. He's got his PhD students who want to be professors, but he's tenured. So he's not going anywhere for a while. So you need a new university, or you need new departments to open up. So there's the fact that a key aspect of the boomer truth regime was that all of these things that have been created can never be uncreated. Nothing can ever be allowed to die. It's created a massive backlog. You can think of this in terms of career tracks. You can think of it in terms of bloated bureaucracies. It's created a whole bunch of downstream effects that are massively sapping the efficiency and the productivity and the competence of all of our different social institutions. So
yeah, I was just going to jump in and say it's you see the massive bureaucracy kind of across corporate America, across the political environment, and you look at who's in charge. Like, people have called it a gerontocracy, where it's like ruled by the old, and it's interesting to see how many people over the age of 80 that should be either off in a home or off on a beach somewhere relaxing, and they just can't let it go, can't give up the grip on the reins of power. So,
and what this has meant is, I mean, once upon a time, you might have seen the president of a college or a university, like a Harvard president, would have been a guy in his 30s or 40s, maybe. Now it's almost unheard of. It stands out when you see, like JD Vance he's the first millennial candidate or first millennial representative on a major ticket in the U.S. and he's 40. So there's been and Gen X has been largely skipped. The last, I think, 5 presidents have all been boomers, and before Joe Biden resigned, we were headed to for sure have another boomer presidency. But even Kamala Harris is 60. So she's not like a young Gen X person. So we're ruled by old people, and these old people just can't get out of the way, which means there's a backlog behind them. And so I started looking at, okay, well, by just matter of temporality, the time is going to come over the next 10 to 15 years where literally all the boomers will be dead, just because.
That's how life works.
That's how life works. Yeah. 1945 to 1963-ish, something like that, is generally the boomer generation. Well, that means that the youngest boomers are 60 now. So 10 or 15 years, 70, 75, 80, they're going to be coming up pretty close on dying. And there's a lot of reasons to suspect of events over the last several years, the heightened stress, various different pharmaceutical agendas, various different things might have something to do with even accelerating that time. Well, because they have been insulated at the top for so long, and this backlog has been developing behind them, when they go, there's going to be kind of a release, and there's going to be a power vacuum. And this power vacuum is actually starting to be filled now, because they're starting to work their way out. But the next generation, just naturally, again, just because of how the world works in terms of time, the next people who are candidates for these positions of not just in the government, but at the head of major institutions and the governing class, well, it's going to be Gen X people. And the Gen X people, by generational definition, aren't nearly as beholden to the boomer truth regime as the boomers were. So if I imagine 15 to 20 years from now, when the world has been remade and all of the major institutions are now governed by Gen X and millennials, because I think it's going to be much more even split than it was between boomers and Gen X. But when the world is now being governed by them, it's going to have a different character. The institutions are going to be directed toward different values. They're going to have a different personality, given the people that they exist in the image of. So what is that going to look like? And this was the whole train of thought that led me to the point where Jason said, you should look into this PayPal Mafia thing, which is actually, there's a Wikipedia page for it. We didn't coin the term, but I was looking at, okay, what are the major Gen X figures? All the people who are Gen X who seem to have major cultural influence, who would they be? I started listing them off. You've got Tucker Carlson, you've got Alex Jones, you've got Joe Rogan, you got Elon Musk, you got Peter Thiel. These were the names that came to mind. Okay, Patrick Bet David is kind of in a similar vein. These are the guys who are Gen X in age. They also tend to be much more Gen X in personality. And they're the ones who command the largest audiences. They're the ones that are the biggest culture movers in terms of the people who are listening to them and following their advice. And they're also almost all of them are very wealthy, so they can, where they choose to invest time and attention and money is going to yield a lot bigger dividends than, say, you or me. So it was in there that Jason said, check out the PayPal Mafia. And so I started digging into these people and seeing what they're talking about, what they're thinking about, trying to maybe like map their motivations. And this was back before Twitter took away the likes, before they made the likes private. I could just go and find these guys because almost all of them have Twitter accounts and almost all of them are relatively active. So I could just go to their Twitter account and go to the likes panel and just look at the things that they were liking. And universally, almost every single one of the guys that I started digging into was, to one degree or another, loudly signaling their displeasure with the current state of things. And they were starting to say things that are a little off limits, talking critically about unfettered immigration, talking favorably about Trump. They're all very hawkish toward China, which is part of why they're concerned about immigration, because they see it as connected to China. Very worried about the competency crisis and having DEI and ESG shoved down their throats and not liking this and not liking the way that this forces them to be inefficient. It prevents them from innovating. And I started realizing, okay, these guys are all aware of each other. They all exist in this little subculture that to now I'd always really identified with being super progressive, which would be like the Silicon Valley and its broader networks. That subculture is where we've gotten a lot of the internet censorship and all this sort of thing. However, as I was digging into this and then also starting to recall little nuggets from the past, I realized, a lot of these guys have been held hostage in their companies. They're not like true believers in the regime narrative. They're actually subscribers to something that's been described at length called the Californian ideology, which is really very much like a 90s libertarian perspective. So socially, they tend to be kind of like, whatever, I don't really care what you want to do in your house, just keep it away from me. You do you, I'm going to do me. They have that sort of generic libertarian perspective, but they're also very transhumanist. And they're transhumanist in a, and if I could say this, they're transhumanist in a pro-human way. So they're not transhumanist in the human species is yucky and disgusting and we need to get rid of it. They're like the human species is so great and amazing. Imagine how much better we could make it. And this becomes actually a substantial difference when they come head to head with the regime, because the regime is at this point explicitly anti-human. And these guys, I've called them the grillionaires, the billionaires who just want to grill. And for them, grilling means like shooting skyscrapers into the sky. They want to build Mars colonies and they want to figure out how to have like free energy and do interstellar
rockets
travel
and brain chips and anything that they think is cool coming out of sci-fi movies.
Exactly. And that's this goes back to the Gen X perspective, because what did they grow up with? They grew up with Star Wars and video games and hacking and post-apocalyptic movies. This is what their brain has been seeded with. And they're also naturally more rebellious or more willing to just give the finger to someone that stands in their way, much more so than the boomers. Not nearly as much as the zoomers, but this is where what I foresee coming is essentially like a Gen X, Gen Z alliance. And the millennials are the ones who are going to be forced to they're going to be split in half. The millennials that go with the alliance and the millennials that go against it. Whereas before the Zoomers came online, we had an alliance between the millennials and between the boomers and the millennials that was ostracizing and splitting Gen X, ostracizing half of it. So the term that these guys or their little circle of people has often used is the gray tribe. It's something that Balaji Srinivasan coined, I think, where they're like, we're not red, but we're not blue either. And really what they are is they're normies. They're normal people. They're not radical vapid ideologues that are NPCs running around with the hive mind, but they're also not like really motivated ideological opponents of the regime, even though they might be kind of inclined that direction. And I've actually, in the course of studying all this, I realized that there are some that are much more, shall we say, activated than they let on in public. And they're beginning to give voice, particularly through people like Vivek and Vance. They're beginning to give voice to ideas that come from our corner of the internet. It turns out that whether it's, I don't know necessarily which direction this flow is traveling. Are they being influenced by the things that we talk about and giving voice to them, or are they sympathetic to the things that we're talking about, and so they're amplifying them? I don't know which way it's going, and maybe it's both.
I think it's the first one, honestly, because if you go through and listen to some of the stuff that I listen to on like the culture side of things, it's completely 180 degrees from anything you get in school, like regular culture, media outlets, all that. And that like some of this stuff, once you hear it, there's no return journey. There's no going back. So I think that's at least my opinion on it. I think they're kind of seeing some of the same things. But one of the things I wanted to pull on was your comment on kind of the rebellious nature of some of these people. You see it with Elon Musk and some of the stuff that he's been doing lately on Twitter. Like the one I'm thinking of specifically is what he replied to a European government official about them getting uptight about something to do with UK and the immigration situation there and all the two-tier justice system, all that stuff. But I want to talk a little bit about Elon, because I think he's arguably one of the most important people in kind of the whole geopolitical landscape, with his influence over Twitter and his ability to kind of move the Overton window. So I'd be curious to hear what you have to think about Elon.
Elon is like he's like the king of the Spurgs. He is entirely, I think really what's happening, he's becoming, Charles Haywood has talked about him being a man of history, a man of destiny, that as he goes, so will go the US empire, because of just the type of character he's both crafted himself into and that he's been crafted into. From the outset, I'll say that my rule of thumb with every major billionaire is that almost to a man, every single one of them is not there's no such thing as a self-made billionaire. They are all fronts or figureheads for deeper influences. Now, among the billionaire class, then, if you have this baseline presumption that every single one of them is like the front man for a coalition that's remaining in the dark, within that construct, some billionaires have more agency than others. Some of them are entirely beholden to their deeper interests. Some are less so. Some are more how would you say? Some are more back facing, and some are more front facing. So some of them are actually mastermind types. I would say Peter Thiel is very much in this vein. Peter Thiel is an activist billionaire. He's not just a front for interests. Like, say, maybe I would say Warren Buffett is probably one of these that would be more just a front for interests. Bezos.
I don't know about Buffett. I think he has a pretty good act. I think he's way more of a shark than he lets on.
He may be. Yeah, I've heard strong arguments in both sides, and I started out seeing him as more of a shark, and then I've heard some really strong cases lately that he's more of a front. In either case, you have Bezos, who I would say is much more of a front. Zuckerberg has been much more of a front. Now, a lot of these guys are also becoming more activated. So they're less like Bill Gates would be the ultimate front. Bill Gates is 100% is an entirely a made man. And I think Zuckerberg has been that. That's how Zuckerberg has been for most of his career. I'm seeing, inklings maybe here that he may be becoming, taking more of a personal stand and inhabiting his own sphere of responsibility more actively. But I think Zuckerberg generally has gotten a lot more of a bad rap than he deserves. I've kind of come full circle on him. But Elon is one of these who is very much in control of a lot of what he's doing, to where his sponsoring interests need him as much as he needs them, because of the position that he's put himself into. And he's absolutely a child of Gen X, 100% in terms of his personality, his demeanor, his values. Very much independent, happy to go his own way and do his own thing. He has massive, grand aspirations, loves video games and sci-fi, and also is not willing to even literally flip the middle finger to powerful establishment figures when they want to try to control him and direct him to buy into the program. He's like, no, I don't buy into your program. And I'm not just going to politely decline. There was the Bob Iger with Disney when Elon was being interviewed live on C-SPAN, and he says, "You want to try to control me with advertising dollars? How about fuck you?" I was like, "Whoa, okay, things are happening quick now." And then the one you mentioned where he the EU official that sent him this sternly worded letter about the danger of him talking to Donald Trump on his space. And he replied with the meme from Tropic Thunder of Tom Cruise telling him to take a step back and literally fuck his own face. I was like, man, like this is.
Yeah, I haven't seen that movie in a long time, but when I saw that, I was, because you see some of the stuff going on in England, and it's just insanity. Like, and they're clearing out jails now to basically put people who post mean things on the internet in jail. And like, I think people here in the US, they're watching that and like they're taking notes. So
yes. And you don't have to be a like a devout, well-studied, neo-reactionary, fully red-pilled to look at that and be like, holy shit, I don't want that in my country. I don't want anything to do with that. In fact, being a normie kind of inclines you toward that. That's what these guys are, largely political normies. They just want to grill. Like they want to actually have the things that the boomer truth regime promised. The peace, the tranquility, the free trade, the ability to all just get along. They actually want that. They actually believe that. They see the 90s as like, instead of trying to go back to the 50s, they want to go back to the 90s. Yeah. That was the golden age where it was kind of a tech, and the internet was like an open frontier, and it was every man for himself. And you just got to bootstrap things by your own sweat, blood, and tears. They see that as an aspirational thing, and they feel like for the last 25 years or so, we've been diverted away from that, and we need to get back to this spirit of innovation and ingenuity and taking and risk taking. So they have a lot of sympathy toward the kind of classic Americana perspective because of that, and they're naturally just ordinary, normal people. They're not radically given over to this ideology that wants to destroy everything that's good, true, and beautiful about humanity. Now, I think that does make it. There is a danger in here because they have the potential for an even more insidious kind of evil, the actual, like, really ambitious, noble transhumanist vision. Because if your transhumanist vision is we're going to hack people up and make them look like degenerate freaks, that's really easy to look at and be like, this is horrifying, this is terrible.
Yeah, but if the AI and the brain chips, if that goes off the rails, that's a lot harder to kind of sort that out.
Right. And I think this is an inevitable progression of humanity. I think this is the natural cycle of humanity. You're going to confront the overt, blatant evil, and in getting away from that, you're going to ultimately fall for the much more beautiful, attractive evil. So there is a out of the frying pan and into the fire kind of dynamic here, I think, with this new elite coalition taking over. But with every negative trade-off comes a positive trade-off. And I think the positive trade-off of them moving into the positions of power is, number one, they're not going to be, because they aren't fully given over to this radical anti-humanist spirit, they're not going to be like hunting people down and forcing brain chips into their heads. Piquignones has pointed this out. He said people like, oh, Elon's going to come put a chip in your head. No, he's not. He's going to have millions of people lined up begging to have chips in their head. He's not motivated personally or commercially to go hunt people down and try to put chips in their heads. So the way I see these guys is they are our guys to the extent that they are going to carve out space that we can occupy. They're going to allow us to retrench and build up our own local communities. They're going to give us space and kind of take the beast from immediately off our back, breathing down our neck. They're going to fight with that beast for a little while, which gives us time and space. And also, more speculatively, many of them have shown an interest and an affection for our values and our types of ideas. They're, Elon talking about being a cultural Christian, effectively. They're willing to even to at least pay lip service to the idea that we deserve to live and have our own communities and pursue our own values. And then on a less like politically charged level, just the fact that they want to build a massive industrial base to be able to actually do the sorts of things they want to do, to interstellar travel and launching rockets and all that, they need to have a wealthy, prosperous, stable, secure American polity in order to do that.
Competent too.
Yes, competent. Yeah. So our guys, if you're like, oh man, they won't hire white boys. I can't get ahead in the existing system, and I'm going to be discriminated against for being a straight white male. Yeah, these guys aren't going to operate that way. They're happy to hire you. They're actually quite eugenicist in the way that they're much more willing to recognize racial differences and accommodate for them, and so they care about competence. They want to see efficient institutions. They come from the startup and founder and venture capital world largely, which means they're very used to looking at an organization saying this is completely dysfunctional. It needs some executive power. We need to have some executive authority that comes in and, fires 80% of people within the organization and strips it down to its most ruthless, efficient functioning. And then we're going to scale it as fast as possible. They've set that vision. They've set their sights, informed by that vision, on the federal government. Whether they fully realize it or not, this is the way that they operate. So if they're making their gambit now, this is what they're going to be beholden to.
Yeah. I think it's kind of the enemy of my enemy situation as far as this whole group, where it's like they might not be in line with everything that I would want, but they're not trying to do some of the things that I think are just outright evil. So I think that's at least a step in the right direction. One of the things I think is interesting is with Peter Thiel and some of the stuff, like if you look at the way kind of people on the left look at him, he's kind of the equivalent of a George Soros type figure, where he's kind of the boogeyman. But I think it's interesting to see some of the stuff that he's been up to as far as kind of behind the scenes. Like I didn't get around to watching the Joe Rogan podcast he went on. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to that, but I think he's a pretty interesting character. I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about his influence, maybe some of his connections to JD Vance, Peter Thiel, or Vivek, and kind of how you see that maybe moving forward if we somehow line things up to go Trump victory in 24, right into Vance in 28. But I'd be curious to hear what you have to say on that.
Yeah, so Thiel's someone who's been on of all of these guys, Thiel's the one who's been on my radar the longest. I've from back in my libertarian days, I kind of had a soft spot for him because of his associations with the Seasteading Institute, and and from there, from the Seasteading Institute, you actually get Joe Lonsdale. Joe Lonsdale and Peter Thiel both together, along with Alex Karp and I think one other person, I can't remember. They founded Palantir, and then Joe Lonsdale today is the head of 8VC. He's another one of these very active PayPal Mafia names that I was digging into. And Joe Lonsdale has been leading an initiative together with Leonard Leo, the Federalist Society guy, to cut down on the homeless problem and establishing a legal basis for not tolerating homelessness. So Thiel is someone that I've been following for a long time and been sympathetic to, in large part because of his relationship to Rene Girard. Mimetic theory is one of the most powerful social theories that I've ever seen. It really cuts at the root of how human societies organize themselves. I'm not an expert in mimetic theory. I understand it well. If you want to know more about it, I'd go follow David Gornowski and Jason at the 2-Bit Podcast. There's also a guy named Luke Burgess who's written a book about Rene Girard. Those guys are experts with mimetic theory. Peter Thiel is an expert with mimetic theory. He understands the power of modeling, and that if you create a model for something, you hack the human desiring mechanism, which is desire is the thing that motivates us, and we desire the things that our neighbors desire. I don't desire a particular car just because I see it and I like it. I desire it because it's in my neighbor's driveway and my neighbor values it. My neighbor desires it. The more desirable people see something as, the more desirable it becomes. And then this ultimately drives human beings into a state of mimetic rivalry where we are engaged in rivalry over scarce goods that we both find desirable, and we want to put our stamp on it, or we want to have access to it. So conflict,
envy is a powerful feeling.
yes, and that envy is directed to places that are closest to home, not furthest from home. So for example, I don't know, like a paleo libertarian is going to wind up fighting more with maybe an ANCAP or a regime libertarian than they are with a communist, just because they're. I mean, from my perspective, they're much closer than they realize they are. But to them, they see the communist as the far left guy, and I'm the far right guy, and so I'm going to fight with my far right guys. I'm not going to fight with the left. This is the closer you are to someone, the more engaged in mimetic rivalry you are going to be with them. So I've followed Peter Thiel and observed that he's a very honest, deep thinking, like genius level guy who has a well documented history of being very sympathetic to the Christian, libertarian right wing perspective. And I've heard from people who are close to him that he's much more radical than he lets on. He is very right wing and very Christian. He's a very he's kind of a paradox.
A little bit of a contradiction. Yeah.
Yes. But you see, like where he really put himself onto the scene. I mean, he'd founded PayPal, he'd founded Palantir. He was already a very well established billionaire. But Gawker, you remember the old rag Gawker?
Yeah.
They outed him. They outed him as gay, and he did not want to be outed as gay because he's ashamed of being gay. This is his big struggle. This is his thing that he has to carry around, and he doesn't want to be public about it. He doesn't want to exult in it. They outed him, and he absolutely salted the earth with them. He funded
Hulk Hogan's
lawsuit against Gawker and completely obliterated them. Just he forced them into bankruptcy, and they stopped existing. So he's not someone to be fucked with. So I've heard from people close to him since I started talking about this. I've had a number of different people reach out to me who've had closer personal relationships with him, and they said that like he is one of our guys. He has his own agenda, so it's not like trust the plan, just fall into line behind Peter Thiel. But Peter Thiel is a friend to us. He's someone who the world that he wants to play a part in creating is a world that would be much better for us to live in than the alternative. Once you get to the level of billionaire and you're dealing with these types of stakes, it's I wouldn't want to be a billionaire. I wouldn't want to have to live in this world because they're much more handcuffed, I think, than people realize. You can't just kind of go do whatever you want when you're a billionaire, which is what makes what Elon's doing so significant. It's what makes him so singular.
It's not all yacht parties and galas and all the stuff that you see on like a New York Times or CNN type deal. So
the guys that you see that are doing that are beholden to that lifestyle. They're enslaved by that lifestyle. They have to live that lifestyle as a way of navigating all the different social circles and dealing with all the different financial interests and political interests that are constantly tugging at them. Like they may have aspired to that and wanted that, but they don't have a choice in the matter. They are deeply invested in that, and it will cost them a tremendous amount to try to back out of it. So the stakes get higher and higher the higher you go. So Thiel obviously is it's well documented that he's been a mentor to Vance, and is the reason that Vance is where he is. And there was a news article that dropped just recently that right after the Trump assassination, Thiel was one of the people who was calling Trump personally and saying JD Vance needs to be the vice president. There was Peter Thiel, Tucker Carlson, David Sachs from the All In podcast, who's another prominent PayPal Mafia guy, and then Don Jr. also is close friends with JD Vance. So Vance represents kind of the intersection between, he has the backstory of growing up in Appalachia and being the poor kid and knows how to connect with that world. he also went the Ivy League route and spent a while in San Francisco and speaks that world, that speaks the language of that world as well. So he becomes the focal point for kind of bridging this high-low coalition between that's developing now between these you might call them like renegade technocrats who are now diverting from the mainstream culture that has dominated Silicon Valley and DC and the relationship between them. That's the high part of the coalition, and then the low part of the coalition would be your average MAGA voter, just the flyover country, Midwest, rural white
Enjoys
American.
college football and barbecues and
yes. And there's a natural relationship to be had there because one of the major motivators for this renegade technocrat class is reindustrializing America. Because again, they want America to be, they may share kind of a fundamental presupposition with the whole like free markets and capitalism and democracy. Like they may buy into those things that have led to the boomer truth regime turning America into an economic zone to be harvested for their own good, for their own purposes. They share kind of some of those same presuppositions, but they want America to be a functional economic zone for their own purposes. They want it to be wealthy and prosperous and safe, and they want people to feel fulfilled, and they want people to be good workers and be able to. So it's kind of like it's the same world but different. And
they're not out to screw the little guy, basically.
Right. They're like, I need the little guy to be a good worker because I need him in my factory, making sure that we can rapidly scale up this manufacturing for a really interesting guy to look at is Hadrian. The company Hadrian, the CEO, his name is Chris Power. And basically what he's doing is creating supply chain as a service. He's setting up like CNC machining warehouses that use a special type of software where essentially one guy can run up to 10 machines at one time. And they can train the guy to run the machines in 30 to 90 days. So
that's a cool idea, but they need to figure out something other than the as a service. I'm so tired of hearing as a service tacked on to anything.
That's my assessment of it, to try to capture what they're doing. So they're spinning. They're developing an industry that can spin up a manufacturing capacity very quickly, and then they can do this iteratively. Once they've established the first one, this first warehouse that functions this way using this software and this sort of machinery, they can then use that to rapidly spin up more and more. So over the course of a couple of years, we could, if they're allowed and able to do what they're trying to do within a couple of years, we could have massive manufacturing capacity of like CNC machining. And I'm sure this is going to get into creating chips and being able to scale up our industry much better, because it's with what's happening in Russia, what's happening in China, what's happening in Israel. One of the things that's become very clear to a lot of these guys and people, not just these guys, is that America's manufacturing and military capacity has waned significantly. And if we want to be able to continue to function as a superpower, we're going to have to be able to control our own destiny a lot better than we currently do. Everything's been outsourced, and the American heartland is being stretched apart to all these different foreign interests. And the effect of this will be that we'll no longer have this glorious experiment in capitalism and democracy and freedom in the West, because it'll be outsourced.
The unipolar moment. Yeah.
Yes, right. They don't want that. They don't want that because they need America to serve as the foundation for their interstellar aspirations. So I think there's a relationship that we can have with them here, where they're willing to build up our homeland for us in return for them getting to go do the things that they want to do. So the way I see it is we have an opportunity here to actually get embedded into patronage networks with an elite class that has very high aspirations, that can generate incredible wealth. They're also very pro Bitcoin. So any of you who are this is not investment advice, but any of you guys who are Bitcoin guys, these are natural friends of yours for that reason as well. So we've been crying out for patronage networks. This is a potential patronage network. We don't have a lot to choose from. We can't be super choosy, but they're willing to, for the sake of pursuing their own aspirations and ambitions, they're willing to give us a country that we can live in, that we can have a little bit of space to build up our own local networks, and we might even be able to tap into theirs as well. Like, even in the sense of literally going and working for them directly. They're happy to hire you if you're competent. They don't care if you're male or white or straight or Christian. If anything, they actually might be willing to select in that direction because those guys are overwhelmingly given more toward competence.
Yeah, the basically get in line and help us out so we can build our cool toys and all the stuff we want to do. But like that's when you look at where things are right now, like there's a lot of people that are on the doom and gloom train. And like I definitely go back and forth. Like there's certain times where I see headlines or stuff on Twitter where the algorithm is just feeding you stuff. Where it's just like it pushes all the buttons, you get pissed off, and there's like you have to check that. But I think things have kind of turned. Like I think we kind of hit the peak ESG, peak DEI. Like I think that stuff is kind of a lot of people are waking up to how corrosive that is to having a functioning society, really. So I think where we're going, it's not going to be pretty and it's not going to happen overnight, but I think we're actually headed in the right direction on that front. But to pull on some of the stuff you were saying about Vance and the assassination attempt, I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on what the future looks like as far as the election, potential round two of someone higher up in the government taking another run at Trump. I don't think it was just a kid off his meds or whatever the excuse was with all these things kind of have the same backstory, but I don't think it was just some 20-year-old kid with a screw loose. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on the assassination, the VP pick, if we are going to get another cooked election. Basically, what do the next 6 months have in store?
So the assassination attempt, I definitely agree with your assessment on that. Supposedly we have this 20-year-old kid that managed to
one
get
more
in
thing
there.
before I let you get rolling. Did you hear that they cremated the body?
Yes.
Yeah. So shades of JFK. I'm just like, it took them all. I think it was like 10 days. It was like 8 or 10 days. Yeah.
Yep. And
Okay.
and like
Sorry,
investigators went looking for it for whatever reason. I don't remember if it was congressman or someone went looking for the body to inspect it, and they're like, "Oh no, yeah, sorry, we already cremated it." Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's convenient.
Yeah.
Supposedly, this kid has no digital footprint. He had all of his social media accounts were wiped. Then you have a friend of the show, Andrew Torba. He discovered that this guy had an account on Gab, and so he released that, which totally flew they were trying to say, oh, he was a registered Republican, so this is a Republican crazy, and he doesn't have any social media footprint, so we can't confirm otherwise. Well, it turns out that he was very obviously not a Republican crazy from what he was posting on Gab. And then I just saw this come past my timeline yesterday. He had encrypted messaging with someone from Brussels, if you could believe that. And he had a number of other ones, a number of other countries as well. So he was in encrypted communication with people in all these other countries, including Brussels. And somehow he also has no social media footprint. He's just a random lone wolf guy. Yeah, it's obvious bullshit. It shouldn't be surprising that the story has just disappeared as much as it has, but it's still really frustrating. It's frustrating that I expected from the beginning.
It's been like 5 weeks. It's been like a little more than a month.
Yeah, and it seems like ancient history at this point. People only kind of vaguely allude to it here and there. And honestly, I said this pretty early on, like, we're not going to get the truth. That's not, you can't be sitting around waiting for the truth to be revealed. And, same thing happened with 9/11. Same thing happened with JFK.
They're going to memory hole it just like COVID.
Yes, right.
If you told me in 2021 that we'd be in this election cycle and no one would be saying a word about like the clot shots or any of this other stuff going on, like I would have called bullshit.
Right. But
that's only 3 years ago.
Yeah, which is an eternity now.
Yeah.
We're very much in the time frame where years happen in weeks. So however, I do think I would love to see a J13 commission. And I know there's people who are working on creating something like this. I think that it may just be the way that events line up that it never is able to get off the ground, and so be it, whatever. But if there was a J13 commission, echoing the J6 commission, we get our own now. This could be a fantastic institutional bulldozer that could be used to break into the different NGO networks and everything, all the shadow organizations that have been controlling the federal government for a while now. So I know that there are people off the books unofficially. Obviously, you're getting the Warren Commission effect with the investigation, where the purpose of the commission is to memory hole it. But I still hold out some hope that we can get a something that starts independently, but then is driven toward becoming an institutional bulldozer. That if we get on the other side of an election where Trump winds up being the president, then that's something that could come back up again. But there's so many things happening right now. There's so many different initiatives that people are pursuing, election integrity efforts and all that I think it comes down to just a matter of you can only direct so much willpower in so many different directions, and you have to have the resources. And on the right, we're lacking infrastructure. We're seeing it being spun up pretty well here. I think with the takeover of the RNC, it's very obvious that the new RNC is much more inclined to actually have a functioning ground game. We're going to get a big test of it here in a few months, but I think there's something to be said with the way that the RNC is operating now, that it's not your granddaddy's RNC. So they take the shot at Trump, and immediately Elon comes out and endorses him. And it's kind of funny to think about now. It was not maybe 3 months ago that there were all kinds of stories about, oh, Elon's going to endorse Trump. And Elon's like, nope, I've never said that. They went and had a meeting, and Elon kind of downplayed it when he was talking to Don Lemon. He was like, yeah, it was just a meeting and other people arranged it, and he just showed up, and we maybe had a couple conversations, but there was nothing there. Elon was sort of maintaining his distance and sort of just kind of playing footsie a little bit. This was only like 3 months ago. Now he obviously is full-throated endorsing Trump, had the big conversation with him, and he's become the vector for all of these disaffected technocrats to launch their campaign against the regime. They're using Musk as like the tip of the spear. And so Vance then becomes their pick, because what they recognize is this is not being disaffected liberals or disaffected Democrats. Their beef is with the Democrats, but they're not inclined to trust Republicans. So they're very readily able to recognize the extent to which the establishment Republicans are just the
neocons.
Yeah. They're not neocon friendly, and they don't want to affiliate themselves with a bunch of loser patsies for the DNC, the outer party. They want the inner party. So their beef is primarily with the Democrats, and then they're not inclined to be friendly to establishment Republicans because they've been out of alignment with them from the beginning. So I'd guessed, and I think I was validated in my guess, that the reason that the whole Trump VP thing was getting dragged out, and he was making some funny comments about it. Like, it sounded like he wasn't in control of who his VP was going to be. And there was a bunch of different candidates, and they were still trying to figure it out. It just seemed kind of odd. And I said, I think that there's a war happening right now over who his VP is going to be. And it's either going to be the establishment Republicans pick, or it's going to be the PayPal Mafia's pick. And the PayPal Mafia here has a natural alignment with the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025. They also have an alignment with Wall Street and Tom Luongo's thesis about the American banking establishment turning against the globalist EU sort of City of London faction. So there's a coalition that's developing here, and Vance sits kind of right at the heart of that. He's very friendly, personally friendly, and has a professional relationship with a lot of the Heritage guys. Obviously, he's got the inroads into Silicon Valley. And then he's been a senator for a while now. And he's also been characterized as a senator with being willing to reach across the aisle and work with even the squad if it's something like going after corporate power. So,
and he's also a little bit of a life insurance policy too. Like from
exactly.
some of the stuff I've heard, that there's a lot of kind of establishment people on the left that are like terrified of a Vance presidency. So
right, because I've seen enough at this point to the things he said privately, things he's written, like the whole corpus of work that he has in public, and listening to him talk and watching the way he interacts with people. That I think some guys there's a little too much autism, and they're not able to like take in the entire picture of him. But if you have like a sense for a person, it's very clear that he's very authentic, and he's if he's not our guy, then it's just not possible to have our guy in a position of
Yeah.
power like that.
That's already game over.
Right. So he's the closest thing to our guy that I think we're ever going to see. He would absolutely hang out in our group chats and talk shit with us, and he would very much be aligned with us on virtually everything. So he becomes a fantastic insurance policy, because I think the candidate it was going to be was Marco Rubio. I think that was who the pick was, which is obviously the establishment GOP pick,
That
who
would
would
have been a
sort of look
disaster.
like, he would sort of appeal to the young guys, and he can kind of do a little shit posting and stuff. So
He's
it's
just
sort
an
of
empty suit.
like a hello fellow kids kind of character. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the case that Tucker said this. He said he told Trump, if you pick Rubio, you're dead. Because it would be so easy to just take you out, and now Rubio becomes the inheritor of right-wing policy leadership or whatever in the U.S.
Yeah.
And you know exactly how that would have gone, because he is an empty suit. So Vance being the insurance policy itself, like you got to put down the autism. The fact that Vance is seen as an insurance policy is itself commentary on who Vance is and how he's perceived. So he's not just going to be an empty suit, because imagine they do take a shot at Trump and they do take him out, and now Vance is the heir apparent. It's actually a Vance versus Kamala or whatever. Do you think Vance is going to move closer to his Silicon Valley backers or further away from them? I think it's very obvious that that's going to push him even closer to them and advocating even more radically for their interests, which will be dialed up to a fever pitch on these same issues of anti-DSG, anti-ESG, anti-DEI, pro sealing off the border, preventing illegal immigration, scaling up manufacturing and industry, securing U.S. control over their own currency. All of these things are very important to, these are the key issues to these guys. So having Vance there ensures representation for their perspective. The VP can play a significant role in determining the personnel within the White House, which I'm sure that he's going to have a role to play in, because that's going to be like the next big front. So yes, what I think is going to happen over the next 6 months, I'm on the record now saying that I think that this is going to be a redux of the 2000 election. I think that this election is going to be determined in the Supreme Court, and they're going to be forced into actually making a decision on it, because in 2020, the public sentiment was such that in 2020, they could conceivably just say, no, we're not even going to get into it because we want to remain impartial. Now they wouldn't be able to do that. If things play out such that it's being pushed to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court has to weigh in on this, them choosing not to weigh in on it is them being politicized. I think we've seen enough rumblings from them, from some of the statements that they've made, that they see it this way. They would prefer that it never get to that point, but if it does get to that point, they're going to be forced to weigh in. And then,
otherwise you have to deal with the whole legitimacy issue.
Right. And they're going to get the court packed on them, and they don't want the court packed. So, and now you've got like the taxing unrealized capital gains
that'll never happen, man. It's so funny though, when you see people talking about, oh, it only starts at $100 million. You don't have $100 million. I'm like, yeah, no shit. But look what they did with the income tax.
Right.
Like where it starts and like the ratcheting down over time. It's like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you where that's going and what the side effects of that is. So
yeah, even if it's only targeted at the 100 million plus or whatever, it would have a profound negative effect. Even it would almost be more profoundly negative, because it would happen to people at that level where they're going to be suddenly forced to divest themselves of all these investments, which is obviously the purpose of it.
Yeah. My point is, people are just complaining about their stock portfolios, like, oh, this will not be a big deal for you. It's like, I don't think they realize what happens if someone wants to go do some big, massive project, and like all that money is going to go overseas so fast that people will just be shocked. So
yeah, well, it will absolutely,
which is why I think it'll never happen, because even the Democrats, the people that are funding the left, they're not insane enough to try that, and I think they are not going to do it because it's not in their best interest either. So
I think I do think that there are plenty of people who think that it's actually possible that it'll happen, enough that it's going to be treated as if it's possible that it'll happen. There's a really good conversation between Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, who are the Andreessen Horowitz boys, who are very much part of this this rival technocrat cabal.
Kind of PayPal Mafia adjacent.
Yes, yeah. In fact, I think a lot of people have pointed out how Peter Thiel is not like actively the front for the money that's being distributed out to different places now. I think it was either Jason at the 2-Bit podcast or it was Pete Quinones. They said that it looks like Andreessen has kind of picked up the mantle from Peter Thiel, where Thiel is much more of a background actor, and Andreessen is the one who's a lot more public with a lot of this stuff. But the Andreessen Horowitz has been talking for a while about their little tech agenda, and this gets to the AI war, that the closed source versus open source AI innovation front, and the little tech guys, the PayPal Mafia contingent, they land on the open source side because, and this is like intra San Francisco politics bursting onto the national scene. They've been having this battle for a while now with like the Googles and Sam Altman and the rationalist crowd in San Francisco, who are massive AI doomers. They say, that if AI innovation is allowed to go on unabated, that we're going to manifest Skynet. And so, in order to prevent Skynet, we need to have strict regulation on the doing of math to prevent.
To prevent Skynet, we need to build Skynet.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the way that the open source, the little tech side, that's exactly the way they see it. So, and they see this as a national security. I really strongly recommend listening to everybody to go listen to Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz talking about the little tech agenda on YouTube. And they talked about the taxing unrealized capital gains. And they said that there's actually, this isn't just rhetoric, there's actually legislation on the docket that is planned to be presented and debated and everything next year after the election. So, and they spend the entire time talking about how they've always been willing to work with either side. They're businessmen, and they're like, if we can get the Democrats to advocate for our interests, then we're happy to donate to Democrats. And if the Republicans, we're happy to donate to the Republicans. But they said over the last several years, they've just gotten completely frozen out by the Democrats. They won't even talk with them, won't engage, won't listen to them. And the Republicans are very open to them and very willing to work with them. So this is part of what motivated them to come out as pro-Trump. But this is the issue that they're probably most wrapped around the axle about, is the AI war, the AI innovation war. And their concern is that we will lose to China. I know I've heard from plenty of people that China isn't nearly as far advanced as China wants us to think they are. But I also think China is just a proxy for the exact same interests that are trying to destroy America. They need America to be destroyed, to no longer be an economic force, to be fully subjected, no possibility of losing control of the direction of the country. Like this is a centuries old plot to subvert America.
Yeah,
these guys are calling it out for whatever reason, whatever motivations they have. I'm happy that they're throwing their significant lot into trying to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, I think the more immediate China problem to focus on, I think, is the fentanyl and the stuff going on at the border.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking up a stat, and it basically, there's been more overdoses from fentanyl in the U.S. since 2020 than Americans that died in World War I or Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see that, and it just kind of shows you the state that certain parts of the country are in. It's frustrating to watch because it's completely, it's a fixable problem. So that kind of leads me into some of my thoughts on immigration that we can maybe get into wrapping it up. But most of the stuff I write about is focused on investments, what I'm doing with my portfolio. I do the occasional detour into politics, current events. I kind of highlighted in December that the most important issue of this election is going to be immigration. I think at least where we are right now, it's kind of played out, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, is this something we can fix? And do we get the mass deportations that Trump has kind of talked about? Is it illegals that basically, some people say it's 10 million. That number's been 10 million for 40 years, but is it 20, 30? I don't know. But is it fixable? And is there a point of no return? I kind of think if we get another 4 years like the last four, right? If we get Kamala and it's the same thing, then all bets are off. All bets are off on the U.S. being a country in 2 decades. So that's
Yeah,
kind of my view.
I think it probably be even less than 2 decades. I think another 4 years of Kamala or Kamala.
4 years of the bureaucracy, deep state, whoever you want to label it.
Right, right. I think either way, I'll preface this by saying that my expectation is that America, as currently constituted, is going to cease to exist in 50 to 100 years, somewhere in that time frame. I think we're transitioning into a new age with new governance structures, and there's some tides that have been held back with respect to technological innovation, that if those tides are broken, whether or not those tides actually, whether or not the if we get the worst case scenario where everything just completely degrades, then naturally there's not going to be an America left. There's still going to be a continent, but how that continent is governed and who lives here is going to be just about anybody's guess. Even a Trump election in this case, so breaking that flow and getting 4 years of these guys and their proxies being able to imprint on reality as much as they can. Even still, I think this is just postponing the inevitable. What it's ensuring is that this transition of power that happens, this transition of in structure of government to whatever the new thing is going to be. I think we've still got some kind of glimpses of what it's going to be, but we don't know for sure. It's kind of like when America was founded, and you have this this new Republican structure of government that is kind of an experiment. I think we're on the cusp of something similar to that, and we don't, by definition, we don't know exactly what it's going to be, because if we did, then it would already be. I think either way, the U.S. as currently constituted is going to change. So I happen to believe that we are not at the end of the American empire. I think we're at the beginning. I don't think we've actually experienced the American empire as such yet. We're still in the, you can't really draw like a hard line for when one empire ends and the other one begins. They naturally overlap. But I look at this from the perspective of 500 to 1,000 years from now, looking back in history and trying to figure out what was happening. I think it'll become very clear that the British Empire actually has been persisting. I don't think it's necessarily been British per se. I think it's a thing called the British Empire that's being hollowed out and governed by, let's say, some parasitic influences, perhaps. And it has been using America as a proxy for maintaining the shipping lanes that defined the British naval empire. But I don't think we've actually had strict control over the U.S. controlling its own currency and dictating its own economic destiny, and actually controlled and governed by its own military. I think it's been a proxy for the entire time that it could be conceived as a superpower. So what we're seeing right now is a transition to the point where the British Empire and its leftovers are finally beginning to go the way of history, and we're moving into a relatively untold new history where you're going to actually see the rise of America as the predominant power. There's going to be a period of turmoil of probably 50 to 100 years before that really is established. But I would say in terms of, if you think of the American identity as a human life cycle, I think that we're in like the teenage years, adolescence to teenage, somewhere in there, which is why things are kind of so chaotic and unpredictable. And well, it's like we're going through puberty. But part of this, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've said a couple times that I think in my lifetime we get something closer to a monarchy, or something that is not because right now what we have is basically an oligarchy wearing like the Democratic Republic as a skin suit and trying to tell everyone, oh, your vote matters, this and that. It's like, no, not really. But
yeah, right.
I think it'll be something that's like a lot more like there'll be centralized points of control, and people just like hear king or emperor and they automatically have like a gag reflex here in the States. But I think if you look at history, like having a king or having someone where they actually have the best interest of the country in mind, like that's kind of the most natural form of government that humans have come up with. So I don't know if there's going to be some representative form that kind of interacts with that, but I still think we're kind of heading back to the default settings where it's going to be something closer to a monarchy. So that's kind of just my view on it.
There's I guess a model that I've been trying to use to visualize this. I noticed how you've got kind of this parallax effect where the introduction of the internet caused both massive centralization and massive decentralization at the same time. So you have the largest companies to ever exist that are super consolidated and centralized and have massive power relative to any other company in history. Companies like Apple or Google or um, like those are the big ones. Meta. Some of these companies are just absolutely astronomically massive and wield disproportionately massive control. At the same time, you can also like you start a Substack and you start doing a podcast and you're building up a little company that you control, where you're
Yeah.
generating income independently. So that, like, both of these things are happening at the same time. You get this completely decentralized power effect.
The centralized decentralization.
Yeah. And then there's actually the possibility, the capacity for leveraging yourself into a really a pretty high position relatively quickly. You got someone like Tom Luongo that I just subscribed to his Patreon recently, and he's making like 30 grand a month from his Patreon. So he's making like a mid-tier CEO salary just as an independent guy running his own operation on the internet. Then
What he
this
does
this
is
is
worth every penny, though. Like,
absolutely.
for anyone listening to this, if you guys aren't on his Patreon, if you follow markets and have kind of an eye on the culture and current events too, like it's worth the $10 a month or whatever it is. So sorry.
It's
Anyway,
wildly under
continue.
it's yeah, he's wildly undercharging for what he's offering.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. He should be 5 times the size. Um, but so I think that this is kind of a model for what we're moving toward. We're seeing kind of a foretaste of it in the commercial domain, so to speak, and we're going to see this is the direction that governance, I think, is moving, where you're going to have both a continued globalized centralizing effect, but that it's going to become more and more departed from your day-to-day life. And simultaneously, there's also going to be a decentralized revival in localism. So local governments are going to have much more of an impact over your life on a day-to-day basis. And then there's also going to be a globalized, centralized effect of something kind of like transnational government organizations that so you're going to get kind of like you're going to get a rise of nationalism along with a rise of globalism simultaneously. So the United States is, I think, beginning to be ahead of the curve on this, or at least the sentiment that's developing within the United States, which is that we need to retrench. We need to pull everything back in and establish our own national borders. So this ties into the immigration thing that you're talking about. Are we going to get mass deportations? I think we're probably going to get deportations. Whether they're mass or not, I think is going to be up for debate. I do think that the Republican Party is signaling in a way that I've never seen the Republican Party in my life. Like the Trump War Room campaign tweeted out an image the other day that said, "Import the third world, become the third world." Never in my wildest dreams
That's
could I have imagined that
that's
we'd see that.
a line that I've used in some of my posts, and to hear that coming out of like someone directly tied to the campaign, that does seem that wouldn't have happened 5 years ago. I mean, that's pretty surprising. I didn't see that. So
And there was mass deport. And in the image when they tweeted that meme, they showed like an idyllic suburban neighborhood with the sun shining compared to like an inner city. It was like all black people like mobbing around some like poor little alley or something like that. It was like, whoa, this
doing
is a spicy one.
mostly peaceful protests or
Right,
something
right,
along those
right.
lines. Yeah.
Yeah, living in tents and everything. So, and I mean, at the RNC, there was mass deportations now signs everywhere. So there's definitely a significant popular will for it, and technically speaking, it wouldn't be that difficult. The biggest thing that I think we'll probably get is a they're saying largest deportation effort in American history. So their rhetoric on it is very strong. I expect that they're going to deliver to some extent on that. I'm prepared to be disappointed. I don't think that we're going to get, we probably need like 50 million deportations at least. We're probably not going to get that. But what I think we will probably get is some deportations and a creation of incentives such that people will self-deport. I think that's something that would be very easy to do. You give people a 90-day warning that if you're in 90 days, we're going to be investigating your company, and if you're hiring any illegal immigrants, then you're going to be fined $5,000 per person per day, or something
Yeah.
like that. These are the sorts of things that are very easy to create. Now, there's a thing that Naval Ravikant has said before, that with respect to like freedom of speech, he said if you have some sort of a technology that you're going to use to govern with, you should give it to your enemies and see how they govern with it, and use that to determine whether or not you actually want to move forward with it. Because I think the type of infrastructure that would have to be created to enforce a self deportation incentive policy like that can obviously be weaponized very easily and used against us. So, I think some of these things are
Aren't we
just
already there though? Like
basically, yeah.
with the justice system and some of the other stuff going on.
What it would be doing is it would be formalizing that. It would be formalizing the legal structure for being able to investigate companies and force them to divest themselves of particular types of employees. I think that this is there is no alternative. You're going to have a structure like this no matter what. That can has been opened, so you're going to have a federal government apparatus that's deeply inserted itself into private companies and ensuring that they're complying with the law. And the question is, what is that law going to be, and what is that apparatus going to be constituted by? And there isn't a libertarian option here. If you take the libertarian option, you're just saying, okay, well, so the enemies are the ones who are going to have it, and that's the only thing that's the only manifestation that it's going to have in our lives.
Yeah,
All
I
right,
got
so
nothing against libertarians as long as a train stop to a different philosophy that actually makes sense. So
right, yeah.
I'll leave it at that. But
And I have nothing against libertarians as long as they don't stand in the way of the trains running on time.
yeah. But yeah, no, it's interesting to kind of think about, because you've got all these people that say, "Oh, it'd be like so much violence and this and that." Like the thing that I'd be worried about is the people that are almost for certain in the country already from foreign states, whether it's Iran, China. I mean, take your pick. Like I would be shocked if there's not already pretty decent sized cells in a bunch of cities across the country because of the way the border's been over the last
Mhm.
handful of years. And so that's what I would be worried about. But as far as the actual process of basically removing people that shouldn't be here, it doesn't have to be some like massive violent type thing that you read about in a textbook. So
It will be framed that way. The regime press is gonna. If you remember Elian Gonzalez in Florida, it's kind of an older
well, I
reference.
mean, CNN is almost certainly going to have the crying mother and children and
Oh
all
yeah,
that. Like they're going to pull on the heartstrings, but I mean, you have to ignore that, or basically just look at it as like that's the cost of doing business. So
right, right.
um,
And I think on a personal level, I think that if you are someone who runs a company that is hiring people, you absolutely there's the possibility that you're going to have the legal cover to be able to do this on your own individual level. So, each of us can only control the domain that we control. So you can make the decision. I'm not going to hire an illegal or someone. I'm not going to hire someone that I don't think should be in the country. And hopefully you're going to have the legal cover to be able to do that without getting hunted down by the Justice Department for discrimination or some such whatever.
yeah,
But
we still have
going
ways.
back to
I was going to say we still have ways to go to get to actual freedom of association, but I guess one thing at a time.
right, right, and going back to the idea of the decentralization and centralization thing happening, I do think that if you're trying to look at this sort of thing from the federal level, yeah, you're likely going to be pretty demoralized because I think federally there's not going to be it's not the federal numbers probably aren't going to look as aggressive as anybody wants them to, but what we are going to get is the ability to govern our local communities more directly. And so this sort of thing can happen more on the local level. So you can think of like throwing these people out of our city, throwing these people out of our county, maybe throwing these people out of our state. In certain states like Florida or Texas, you might be able to get more headway on this front. Or maybe, like Wyoming or Montana, that sort of thing. But it's going to require a lot of when I've talked about the PayPal Mafia thing, I've gotten a lot of people that are saying, "Oh, I'm just saying trust the plan." And I'm saying, no, I'm explicitly not saying trust the plan. I'm saying we need our own plan. If these guys are successful in the whatever gambits they're pursuing, our success will be defined by the extent to which we follow in their wake and use the energy that they're generating to accomplish our own things. So it's not just sit back and, oh, the PayPal Mafia is going to take over and they're going to kick out all the illegal immigrants. I don't even think they necessarily would do that. I think they would probably want to get a sufficient number, but they would mostly just want to stem the inflow, which is itself a win. You know, if the alternative is opening the gates even wider, then I'll take just closing the gates. And then on a local individual level, we can manage our own communities and we can throw these people out of our communities. If they don't belong here, then what we can be doing now is working with creating our own local organizations and lobbying our local governments and getting our guys elected into positions where they could do this sort of thing. You know, getting our guys elected as sheriffs would be one of the best things ever, because sheriffs have a tremendous amount of control over their local jurisdictions. They could throw federal agents. They can arrest a federal agent and throw him in prison and kick him out of the state. So, like, these are the sorts of, it's not trust the plan. It's recognize that we have the opportunity to even create a plan in the first place, but it still is incumbent upon us to create and execute those plans.
Yeah, it's everyone's looking for a savior. I think it's just going to be some pie in the sky. Someone's going to come in and solve every problem overnight. And that's not how this is going to work. This is going to take decades to fix all the shit that's coming, whether it's financial markets or kind of the economy, or culture, what's going on, current events. We didn't even really get into what's going on in the Middle East or Ukraine, which I think is has a lot of potential to cause some problems, I guess, over the next 5 years is I guess the most optimistic way to put it. But I could go on and on for hours and kind of keep chatting, but I don't want to keep you too long. The closing question I could come up with to ask all my guests is, what book do you think I should add to my reading list?
I would say the book that always comes to mind whenever someone asks me this question is kind of a funny one, but I think it of all the books I've read, it probably changed my perspective on the world the most, and that's The Brothers by Stephen Kinzer, talking about the Dulles brothers, Alan and John Foster Dulles. I think they're two of the most important Americans who've ever lived that most people have never heard of. So if you want to understand the infrastructure of
they think it's an airport.
Yeah, right. Yeah. He's John Foster Dulles is who the Dulles Airport was named after. But it runs from they were born in the late 1800s. They were the sons of a Protestant minister, and they had that. It really informs. I think the best thing you could take away from that book is an understanding of how the national security state was formed, where it came from, the sentiments that motivated its formation, and how it was built on the back of like U.S. missionary culture. So you get Foster Dulles, who participated in the writing of the Treaty of Versailles. He was deeply affiliated with Nazi Germany and had to be basically dragged kicking and screaming away from them as the war was starting. And then it goes into the formation of the CIA and goes all the way up to Kennedy's assassination. So it's a Kinzer is probably, I wouldn't call him a voice for the regime, but he's more just kind of like a classical liberal perspective on it, maybe. So the Dulles brothers are definitely presented as more villainous than not. And in hindsight, I've actually kind of started coming full circle on them a little bit, even though I've been as a libertarian, I was very ready to believe that the Dulles brothers were absolute American villains. I've been kind of full circle on that again, given their opposition to communism and what was motivating it. But yeah, Kinzer's books are all very well written, very well researched, and they're easy to read. So that would probably be my favorite book to recommend.
Basically, the early life of the deep state is kind of what it sounds like.
Yeah, early life check on the deep state.
Yeah. The thing that's interesting, and you're just talking there a little bit. I'll try not to ramble on too long, but you're talking there about how your perspective has changed on some of these different figures. I think one of the things that'll be interesting to see is guys like Richard Nixon or McCarthy and some of these figures that like you go to high school and these are the some of the worst guys in American history, and then you start to do some digging. You're like, well, there was a big issue with communism in the
Uh-huh.
U.S. and I'm not sure how organic the kicking Nixon out was. That seemed to be orchestrated, let's say.
There's a
But
very good conversation Tucker Carlson just had with a guy on that within the last 2 weeks or so
okay,
that goes deep into all the things going on there. And yeah, it was absolutely it was a seminal moment in American history because I think the the operatives that made that happen were kind of just they were sort of figuring this stuff out in real time, but they developed a playbook inspired by elements within the CIA that has then been recapitulated over and over again. But you could see the seeds of it happening there. I really, really recommend that conversation.
okay. Who was it with? Do you know off the top of
I
your head?
can't remember the guy's name. I can look it up here real quick. He was
No, that's all right.
actually
I
personally
can ask
involved
you.
in it.
I can ask you off air, but I do appreciate you coming on and take the time. Do you have anything else you want to cover, or anywhere where the people should go look if they want to watch your stuff on YouTube or find you on Twitter?
Yeah, so King Pilled is the podcast YouTube channel. Every morning I do the Astrolabe, which is a like a variety show looking at the videos and tweets and articles and stuff that have caught my attention. I stream for a couple hours every day on that Monday to Friday. And then the King Pill Discord is where I spend a lot of my time hanging out, chatting with my people. So if you go to kingpill.com, you can find the Discord. Ben is a member of the Discord. So
You'll find some good memes there, some good conversations, some interesting voice chats too. So
yeah,
definitely worth checking out.
we had a guy recently who was having issues with heartburn, and he got a recommendation to we have a health and fitness channel in there, and we got a recommendation to eat borax. And apparently, a borax is actually it boosts testosterone. So if you want some real schizo health advice, you can go there too.
There you go. That's what we could all use some health advice from the gym bros. So
Yeah, right.
anyway, I think we'll have to be wrapping up from that interesting, wide ranging conversation. But I really do appreciate taking time to come on. So with that, I think we'll be wrapping up. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.